So on page 86, he makes a really good point about understanding how we can get higher wages for our work. And I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding, especially with Bernie Sanders supporters, about how we get higher wages. They seem to think that higher wages just comes out of a state decree. But obviously, if we could impose a minimum wage of $10 in the countries of Africa, I think most people would say, yeah, that wouldn't work. So there is some sensibility still in the Bernie Sanders type person. But hopefully there could be more economic education. And here's a really good point here on page 86. So he says that consequently, in the countries of capitalistic civilization, the increase of capital accumulated outruns the increase in population figures. To the extent that this happens, the marginal productivity of labor is increased as against the marginal productivity of the material factors of production. There emerges a tendency toward higher wage rates. So let's take that example. So what he's saying is that a more prosperous and wealthy country is one in which capital, so all the things that go into making things, and as well as our own goods, those resources, if we can increase our resources and our things that give us more resources, if we can increase that at a much higher rate than the population growth, then we will become a wealthier country. And the next point is that if we have better and better technology, we can cut down on the number of jobs it takes to produce something. And those people who will work still for those in those factories or on that machine or whatever it might be are paid far higher because they are more productive. A human being on his own without capital is very unproductive. They are essentially a slave. And I don't mean slave in the sense of being bonded. I just mean in the sense that a human on their own is very unproductive, and slaves are very unproductive. How you get higher wages is not you and your muscles. It's your tools that you work with. And often it's the case that a single individual cannot purchase the kinds of tools that it takes to make, very expensive objects. Usually it takes a entrepreneur or a venture capitalist to borrow the money, purchase the truck or the factory or the tool and die set, or whatever it might be, and then hire people to use it to produce goods. Now, take the easy example of ancient farming, where you basically have tons of people out, and it still happens in the world in very unwealthy countries. You have a ton of people out farming. Well, those people are very unproductive, and their wages, therefore, are very low. But if you compare that with the productivity of one American or Canadian or European farmer who drives a tractor, that person can do, what's the equivalent of his work? The equivalent of his work is how many people? Hundreds of people? Him driving a tractor around? His labor is equivalent of hundreds of people. And so, of course, his wage is much higher because he essentially is doing the work of hundreds of people. That is how you increase the wages of people. You increase the value of their labor. It's not their person. It's not the human being. Obviously, it includes their skills, but it's ultimately their capital. And their capital, what they're using, their tools, their equipment, their tractors, whatever it might be. And of course, that can include their skills. And so he makes a similar point to that on page 89. So Mises says, they are higher, so this is talking about wages, because they are determined by the marginal productivity of labor. The employer of a butler withholds this man from employment in a factory and must therefore pay the equivalent of the increase in output which the additional employment of one man in a factory would bring about. So another aspect of this is higher wages is also a product of competition. So when you're working at one place, and obviously this isn't a perfect situation, but you are supposedly getting the highest wage you can. And if you were to find another job that paid better or had benefits or whatever it might be, then you would take that job, or you would ask your current employer to give you a raise. right? So another thing that increases your wage is your ability to compete by taking other jobs. If other jobs are available that would pay you more, that values your skills more than your current employment. Now, a way that wages get suppressed is people who don't do that, people who stay in their job and think it's a dead-end job, but don't look for other things. Well, they are by design suppressing their own wage, because if they looked out and looked for other jobs while in their job, then they could either find a better job that paid better or make their employer pay them more to keep them. So that's another way that you can increase your wage. He mentions Karl Marx, and Keynes, and we have a lot of Keynesian economics kind of reigning today. But he says that no one has been able to, not even Marx and Keynes and he says a host of less well-known authors could show a weak point in the statement that there is only one means to raise wage rates permanently and for the benefit of all, those eager to earn wages, namely to accelerate the increase in capital available as against population. So he says that Marx and Keynes and other people like them have never been able to criticize that, and they've never been able to show in economics that that is not a fact. And then he says at the very end, if this is unjust, then the blame rests with nature and not with man. So he's saying that this is how things are in this universe, that if you want to have a prosperous society, you must either, I suppose you could see it this way, you must either raise capital or lower population growth. That's the only way to have a prosperous society, because if you let population explode, but you leave your productivity rate the same, then obviously you're going to have less to go around, right? You're going to have social unrest. So the capitalistic countries are the ones who permit capital accumulation, who allow people to be entrepreneurs and to try out new ideas, to take out a loan and try out a new recipe or a new technology. And the more we can accumulate capital, meaning the more we can accumulate things that make other things, the more prosperous we will be. And the people who work on those machines are far more productive and therefore earn higher wages than the hundreds of people that will be out in a farm, because they have no capital.